Hello and welcome. I'm Liz Booker, literary aviatrix, and I'm excited to celebrate the launch of a new historical fiction, The Uncharted Flight of Olivia West. Fewer than 10% of pilots and aircraft mechanics are women. These are their stories of tenacity, adventure, and courage. Stories with the power to inspire, heal, and connect. Welcome to the Literary Aviatrix community, where we leverage the power of story to build and celebrate our community and inspire the next generation of aviation. Sara Ackerman, aloha.
Aloha. Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to talk with you and so excited about this new book that you're about to release, The Uncharted Flight of Olivia West. Would you tell us about the book?
Yes. This book is about a female aviator who embarks on a daring race across the Pacific. For those of you may or may not have heard of it, it's called the Dole Air Race. And that was in 1927. And then it's a dual timeline. So we have another story of a woman who uncovers her buried history 60 years later.
Oh, I'm so excited about that premise. I really can't wait to read this book. And you are a very prolific writer. I can't believe I'm so inspired by how much you're just churning out the books. And I'd love to hear about your journey. How did you become a writer?
Well, I had always loved writing. I wrote poetry after college, and I continued that on for many years. And I had just always wanted to write a book. So one day I decided I would start. That's literally, I just sat down to write. But I had an idea from my grandmother, who was here during World War II in Hawaii, who always talked about a lion that the Marines had with them. It was their mascot. And so I centered my first book around that. And then after that, my publisher wanted more and more World War II stories. And so I had 5. And this one is the first diversion from that.
That's so fascinating. And I, read about you on your website, and you talk a little bit more about your grandparents there, which I thought was really interesting. And so I'm also super fascinated by the inception of ideas. And so how did you come to Olivia West?
So Olivia West was born when my neighbor brought me a book called Saga of the Sandwich Islands. I had asked her, I'm looking for ideas, can't really come up with anything. And it's just this big old book, and I was leafing through it, Hawaii history, and I came upon a page about the Dole Air Race. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. I can't believe I've lived here my whole life and never heard about this. It was right after Charles Lindbergh had made his crossing of the Atlantic. And James Dole, who's a pineapple magnate and landowner in Hawaii, had put up this huge first prize to be able to fly to Hawaii, to be the first civilian to make the crossing. And so the whole country became obsessed. It was a really big deal. A couple months later in August, not all the planes qualified, but 8 planes took off for Hawaii. And it was tragic, though, because not all of them made it. When I was looking or reading about this, I thought, my books are usually about females. And there was only one female in the race. But she wasn't a pilot or a navigator. Like in my research, I had realized that there were a lot of female pilots at that time that were very capable and could have done the race. But they didn't. And I don't think it didn't. In my research, it didn't say they were specifically banned from doing it, but, there weren't any pilots in it. So that's how Olivia West was born.
So do you place it in factual events, like in this particular Dole Air Race? You do? Mm-hmm. I want to hear all about that research. Tell me about it. I mean, you spent all these years in World War II, and now you're shifting back in time. So how did that go for you?
It was interesting because my last 2 World War II books I had, like the love interest, they were pilots. So I had read all these books about pilots during World War II and just incredible missions that they went on. And I was just blown away by how much they risked their lives just flying around the Pacific in these little airplanes, like just over open ocean. And I also thought, God, it'd be cool to write about a woman pilot. And so with Olivia West, I just, I think there's a book called Race to Hawaii that includes the Dole Air Race and 2 other attempts to get to Hawaii in the 20s. And then I also read The Spirit of St. Louis, which, it was just because it was at that same time period. It really gave me insight into what it was like to fly at that time, what airplanes were like, just all of that. So it was really interesting for me to research as well.
And did you base your character Olivia on any actual historical figures, or is she just a complete fabrication of your imagination?
She's kind of a compilation of just the women I had read about at that time. There were, so in my book, I have pretty much everyone else is real. I do the whole race. I portray it as much as I can to exactly what happened. The other planes, except for there was one pilot. So the second place plane, I kind of subbed that whole pilot plane navigator out. And because I kind of liked the character, I liked the plane, I liked the story. And so that's a little bit of what I based Olivia West on.
And can you tell us a little bit about Olivia's emotional arc in this book?
So yeah, she's kind of struggling because, there's a man involved, of course. If you know any of my books, there's usually a man. A handsome pilot who also he had taught her to fly, and they had separated, and so her father her father is kind of down and out, her family struggling, and so she really needs this. She really needs this race for herself, for her family, and the money would help. It's just this kind of arc of her, and then just her determination to get there, to get into the race. And then, a lot happens along the way, as you can imagine, 27 hours plus of flying.
And how did you get into that? Like, was it just through reading that you were able to kind of talk about the flying, or did you go for any flights?
I did not go for any flights. It was through reading and old footage. I watched, some old footage. They actually have, surprisingly, I was very surprised, they have old footage of the Dole Air Race taking off in Oakland, which they took off at Bay Farm Island. And also, so Olivia learned to fly in San Diego.
Okay.
So I think it was the Dutch airfield mud flats, where they were, they had Ryan Aeronautics there. So she learned there. And then Oakland is where they took off. And there's footage of that. There's footage of them landing at Wheeler Air Force Base on Oahu.
That's really great. So aside from the initial surprise about the Dole Air Race itself, were there other things that surprised you in your research?
Well, first of all, I was surprised at how long it took. But it was also, it was sad to read, because there was a handful of accidents leading up to the race and training for the race. And then there was a point where the race maybe almost wasn't going to happen. People kind of thought it was suicidal, because not only the flying part, but the navigation. Yeah. So it was really fascinating. When I was looking for ideas and research, I was cleaning out my dad's storage room, and I came upon this book called American Practical Navigator.
Oh, yeah.
It was published in 1926, year before the race. And I spent a lot of time reading through this, and I was just completely blown away by the complexity of it. What these people had to figure out, the magnetic north and the this and the that, and how they actually were able to find a tiny island in the middle of the Pacific was incredible. And I mean, most of them, the chances were that they were not going to make it. the odds were definitely stacked against them to actually hit Hawaii.
As a former ship navigator who had to learn all of the old school ways of navigating, including celestial nav, I'm blown away too by the fact that they were able to. I mean, I feel like I'm a pretty sharp navigator even in the aircraft, but I have so many tools at my disposal that they didn't have. So yeah, I agree. That's just mind blowing.
Yeah. It's impressive. And I guess it was cloudy, like a good portion of the way.
Oh, yikes. Yeah.
A lot of what they were kind of expecting, they weren't able to do.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it's a common theme of that period with all of these, air races and the push to be able to get overseas and all of these money pots that were waiting for pilots that really incentivized them to really push the envelope and put themselves in danger, and lots of accidents during that period.
A lot of danger. And it was it was a 35,000 purse. So I think it was 25,000 first place, 10,000 second. And, back then I think they said at like $350,000.
Yeah.
So and that's a big motivator for a lot of these guys.
So what do you hope that this book accomplishes in the world?
Well, I just think it's just such an untold story, and I love untold stories. And just I would like for people to know about this incredible race and just inspire people. I'm not a pilot, but I was so impressed just by women at the time and what they were doing. And this was before Amelia Earhart became well known. And just I want it to inspire people.
No, I'm sure it will. It sounds just like a great book. I cannot wait to read this. But as we talked about earlier, it's one of many. And so give us a little deeper dive on the 5 other novels that you have out already.
Well, so they're all World War II. They're all include a love story. They all have a bit of intrigue in them. So my recent one, my 5th novel, The Codebreaker's Secret, is about a female codebreaker at Pearl Harbor who is working on cracking JN-25, the Japanese naval code, along with a pilot who's on this top secret mission that really, actually, I think, changed the course of the war. And so that was really fun to write about. That was my first dual timeline novel.
Ooh, I love that format. And the novel that I'm working on now started as dual format or dual timelines, and then I switched it. But I love that.
It was hard to write, but I'm glad I had tackled one dual timeline before I went into Olivia West.
Yeah,
because it just made it a little tiny bit easier to write. And as far as the other books, I have one about a nurse who comes over on the Lurline just before the attack on Pearl Harbor, and so she's there at Tripler when Pearl Harbor gets bombed. I have another one set at Volcano, Kilauea military camp. There was an internment camp there, and so that's my one story. It has a hint of magical realism because the volcano in Hawaii is a very magical place.
That's cool.
Yeah, and then I also have one about the Women's Air Raid Defense. Have you heard of that, the Women's Air Raid Defense?
I don't think I have. Please tell.
So that was another, in World War II, in the very beginning, they set up this, it was like an executive order, and these women were sworn to secrecy, and they took over the whole command center, and they were essentially like early aircraft controllers when radar was just in its infancy. And these women were incredible. They were guiding pilots and ships and tracking aircraft.
That's so interesting. I did hear something, and I can't remember. It was some interview somewhere. I did hear something about this happening in the UK, but I never heard of it here. So now I'm gonna have to read that book.
Yeah, it's a fun book to write. Yeah,
that's so interesting. And when we got on, you mentioned your works in progress. So what can we look forward to?
Well, I have a book coming out in November that I've already written. It's just in the editing phase. And that is completely different than all my other books. It's modern day. It's also about a female. She's a field biologist, and she's trying to kind of save this waterfall on Maui from a developer. And she meets a big wave surfer from the mainland. And so it's really mainly at its heart a love story.
Love it.
And kind of an adventure story as well.
That's cool. And anything you can tell us about the one that you are still working on?
That one is a murder mystery set in Waikiki in 1905, also a dual timeline and 100 years later. And it's based on a true story.
Wow.
It's a very well-known unsolved mystery.
Well, Sara, we're so privileged to have your writing acumen and your experience and your popularity, frankly, to for you to lend that to a story that features women in aviation, because the more visibility that we get, the more people know that Amelia Earhart wasn't and isn't the only pilot, the female pilot who ever existed. As much as we love and respect her in our history, there were so many more. And so you creating a fictional character that people can delve into, along with our other wonderful best-selling authors, is just good for the community. So thank you so much for doing that. And it launches on the 6th of February. Is that right?
Yeah. Next Tuesday.
And where can we find it?
Pretty much anywhere where books are sold. I always suggest people get it at their local bookstores. And if they don't have it, they can order it, or libraries, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, usually Walmart and Target, and all of those good places.
And where can we find you?
Sara Ackerman Books is my handle on Instagram and Facebook. I think I'm Ackerman Books.
Okay.
And my website is the same as my name.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about the book, or anything that you wanted to share before we move into talking more deeply about writing?
No, I think that's about it for now. I don't want to give too much away. There's so much to this book, though. I must say that one thing I think about the two storylines is I really love how they come together. And I think I've had really great feedback on that. So that makes me happy. There was a little bit of mystery involved in the race too. I don't think I've mentioned that. And so in the end, that's resolved.
Well, congratulations. It's The Uncharted Flight of Olivia West by Sara Ackerman. It launches on February 6th. Go pre-order it, because that always helps the books in their listings, and definitely drop a review. Thank you so much, Sara, for your time and for bringing your talent to our population.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening. Check out the Literary Aviatrix website for this and hundreds of other books by or featuring women in aviation in all genres for all ages. And while you're there, sign up for the Literary Aviatrix newsletter to stay up to date on all of the Aviatrix book news. If you enjoyed this interview on YouTube or podcast, please like, subscribe, and drop a review if the option is available. Just like book reviews, podcast reviews help our stories reach a broader audience. I'd like to thank Michael Wilds of Massif & Crew for his help producing this interview and his support of all things Literary Aviatrix. Blue skies and happy reading.
I'm ready to go again. I'm ready to say